Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're really excited to have you join us today. We have a fantastic program, and that's due largely to a group of fantastic presenters. So thank you to all for spending this next hour with us. I'd like to introduce David Banas, who's an attorney with Hickman and Lauder. He's a shareholder and a director with Hickman and Lauder, concentrating his practice on elder law, particularly planning in the long-term care issues, assisting with Medicaid planning, that process, trust and estate administrations, as well as everything else that we're probably going to be talking about today. So David, thank you and welcome. We also have Janelle Leonard joining us. She's a licensed independent social worker, care coordinator, also with Hickman and Lauder. And with that advanced certification in hospice and palliative care, her professional background really helps all of us to navigate some of the challenges that we face in care planning, advocacy for older adults, people with disabilities, and even, today we see more with families who have special needs children. And so Janelle is certainly very well equipped to help us with that. And then my next guest is Karen Ramba with Caring Transitions. She is their marketing and development coordinator. And Karen, too, has some great tools in her toolbox that help all four of us actually help our families navigate needs, make adjustments to right sizing, downsizing, and establishing what the next steps are in our all those seasons of life that we all so much face. So welcome everybody. I'm Leanne O'Brien. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the McGregor Foundation, and also work a lot with some of these individuals, the three that I've mentioned, as well as many others that really help us advocate for older adults, and not only just the older adults, but their families as well. So we all want to plan our legacies, whether that means personal, professional, financial, whatever that case may be. And, making plans is the basis of all of that. And it can affect all of us, including an experience that I had. You would think today, most people discuss life plans with the entire family unit. That may or may not still be happening. And, in my personal case, that was something that was never discussed. So obviously, one of the big things that I always promote is, having those discussions with your families. The ending was happy in some regards for me, but, when I say, where are my records? That really was, kind of the big moment for me. I had asked my father one day, if anything should happen, where are his records? And he told me, and that day came. And so I looked in the back of a closet where I was told the records were. And lo and behold, there was a box there marked records. My husband and I pulled it out. And a little bit of my family background was every Sunday my father would make waffles, and we would listen to Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, the Boston Pops, the 1812 Overture, and so on. And guess what? That's what was in the box. All of those Reader's Digest LP record sets. So, after contacting an attorney, and David, you've probably experienced this yourself, I asked, what do I need to do? And of course I was told you need to find if there's a will, a trust, and any other documents. So, having learned my lesson, I will only share with all of you to, there's no time like the present. Make your plans today. It's also a big strain on the children left behind if they don't know what your plans are, what your wishes are, and just to be able to expedite things in a way that can take a lot of stress and burden off the family. So having shared that with you, David, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about, estate planning, what you do and why especially in COVID times now, this is so important.
Yeah. So, many people, when they hear the word or the phrase estate planning, think about your last will and testament. They might think about a trust that you have, what's going to happen to your assets after you pass away. But, you know, one thing that we've learned that's been really illuminated through this past 12 months as we've been living through this global pandemic is that estate planning is just as much and maybe sometimes more of getting documents in place that will enable another person, a loved one, a trusted advisor, an attorney, the ability to make decisions for you while you're alive. If you're incapacitated, to make healthcare decisions, um, to adjust and arrange your finances to pay for long-term care, perhaps to qualify for Medicaid, whether that's in a nursing home, in an assisted living facility, or even at home. I mean, there's a lot of programs through Medicaid that you can qualify for. A lot of times people think that Medicaid is only for individuals that have no money. That's just not the truth, especially if you're a married couple. And if you're going through a time when you're experiencing a degree of incapacity, or you're not able to take care of your own things, you need someone to be appointed as your power of attorney for finances, to arrange these things and talk to someone like me, talk to someone like Janelle, and talk to Leanne and Karen, for instance. I mean, the same thing with a healthcare power of attorney so that medical decisions can be made. And again, tying this back to estate planning, what we're doing is we're avoiding probate while you're alive. Again, people think probate avoidance is about after you're gone. Again, it's simply not the case. We need to put these plans in place and decide who's going to make these decisions for us, even while we're alive. If we don't do that, we run the risk that one of our loved ones is going to need to apply for guardianship for us while we're alive. And where does that happen? That happens in probate court. If you have these documents in place, and they're really low-tech documents, to be perfectly honest with you, and they can conform and change with your circumstances once they're in place. But a lot of times, people come to me and say, "I need a will," and I'll say maybe, and we can get to that. But do you have a good power of attorney for your finances, and do you have someone there to make decisions for you for healthcare? That is estate planning, a comprehensive approach, and it's done best when you have a clear mind. Obviously, before something's happened, and we'll talk about crisis planning versus pre-planning later. But just to get those documents in place is the best advice I can give to anybody watching, any of our panelists here. Get the documents in place and then live your life. And as we've seen, again, over the past 12 months, nobody saw this coming. And for the clients that we had and the clients that came to us, those who have done a basic degree of planning through powers of attorney, we're in a much better situation to deal with these unprecedented events and times that we're in, during the last 12 months.
And David, I would imagine, because as each generation moves forward, we're also probably seeing a lot of individuals that either never were married, never had children. We know that more attorneys are getting involved as guardians. There's also partners, and the state of Ohio looks at them entirely differently. Can you shed a little light on that as well?
Yeah, there's so many people that don't have, again, a spouse, even adult children, sometimes adult children, or the natural supports are across state lines or even across the world. The world's getting smaller, and it's gotten smaller in many respects in the last 12 months as we've learned to live through the pandemic. A lot of that's been good. There's a heck of a lot of business that's been done. I'll speak from my own experience over Zoom, over a virtual event like this. But that cannot replace sometimes, what we need in the community, what we need for a person standing right next to us. And so I would encourage anybody that's looking at this to not be dissuaded to get these documents in place if you don't have a spouse or children that are going to take care of you. Lean on the other relationships, the other important people in your lives, your friends, your neighbors, those that you go to church with. There is nothing overly burdensome about asking a close friend or a neighbor or someone like that to be named in a document like this, so that if you or they go through a period of trouble, that someone is there to make a decision. Does that mean they have to know all the right answers when they're entrusted to make a decision? No, that's what I'm here for, is to guide a person through that. That's what Janelle is there for. That's what you guys are there for, is to guide people. But we want to have someone with authority to make those decisions when the individual can't make them on their own. And so there's a double-edged sword. I mean, in many ways, if I have a son or a daughter that lives in North Carolina, certainly they could be a power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney and act as such in an easier way than ever before with everything that we've learned. On the other hand, if you don't have those individuals, don't let that be a barrier to getting these documents in place. There are people out there that will agree to help you. It's not overly burdensome. I mean, to use a cliche that we're all pretty tired of, we're all in this together.
Janelle, can you shed a little light on it too, from your perspective?
I think what Dave is saying is true. I think that people have misconceptions about who would be appropriate to be powers of attorney, how much work is involved, that they're financially responsible for someone when they become a power of attorney. And it can't be further from the truth. I think the more information, the better. One of the most important things, though, is if you do decide on making someone your power of attorney, that you talk to them. I think a lot of times people are taken aback. They're like, oh, my neighbor named me my power of attorney, but they didn't know that. So it's good to have that conversation and then, utilize the resources that are out there to educate them on what their role would be, what would be covered by that, and, what they should expect should that need arise. I mean, some people have these documents in place and never need them, thank goodness. But a lot of people need them in times of hospitalizations, or maybe they're in a skilled facility and they need someone to pay their bills and make sure things are taken care of. It's always better to just have them in place. We always say, talk early, talk often, and that's so true. And the more you talk about it, the easier the conversation really does get. So.
Right. Well, and as people are looking, to downsize, they may either by choice or maybe by a physician's recommendation, it's time to move on to the next step. And so realizing the many benefits of senior living today is important as well, for the consumer, as well as, all of us in the industries, educating us on, some of the benefits of senior living. I think, we're held to a higher standard for sure, especially now during COVID, with our testing, with keeping residents, families, visitors safe, when we're allowed to at least have compassionate visits now, and when we will eventually reopen for visits. And it really is a way for individuals to simplify their life and to gain freedom from some of the mundane tasks that, oftentimes older adults get burdened down with, managing various payments and mortgages and figuring out how they're going to maintain the yard and any equipment they own and so forth. So, it's not so much losing independence, it's gaining the freedom of choice, I would say, by maybe looking beyond to the variety of what senior living facilities offer today. And in addition, it reduces expenses. I know, I looked at a comparison sheet of, people want to compare room and board to, what their cost of living is. And sometimes we forget that in these senior living facilities, many things are all inclusive. So you're not paying for utilities, you're not paying for lawn care, and for various other ancillary charges. And when I looked at the list and tallied it to the bottom line, I went, oh my gosh, I need to be living in a place like this now. So when some people think, well, $5,000 a month is a lot. Well, when you start to add in your groceries and your gasoline and on and on and on, you don't realize really how much we spend during our lifetime. So So it really does reduce expenses. You know, I think sometimes it gives more freedom to the entire family unit. So the quality of visits is simply visiting. It's not, you know, cleaning the kitchen, doing the dishes, vacuuming the house, coming over to mow the lawn. Um, you know, it's not a bad lifestyle, really. And, you know, that's why 55 and older retirement communities started to, you know, come into the community and into our lifestyles most recently. So, so things have really changed quite a bit in the benefits of senior living, and we're much similar to hotels when it comes to some of the services and amenities, you know, that we offer. So, and you know, when that time comes, we work with a company like the one that Karen represents. You know, Karen has to get herself familiar with the different communities, but you know, kind of what starts that transition or that inquiry for you, Karen?
Well, just to pick up where you left off, Leanne, after we've actually moved someone, a lot of times we hear, I should have done this a year ago. You know, I don't know why I was kicking and screaming the whole way. So anyway, we help, I'm with Caring Transitions, and we help seniors transition into smaller living spaces. And this is a little comic strip here up on the screen. Often we have a lot of things in our basement that we haven't seen or looked at in a very long time. And so when you are making the decision to move, it's very easy to say, well, what am I going to do with all my stuff? I'm just not going to go. It would be easier if I just stay here. But oftentimes, like I mentioned, folks say they should have done it a long time ago. They're engaged, they're involved in activities, they're actually enjoying their retirement, as opposed to being, you know, controlled by their house and all the things they have to take care of and all the stuff around them. So we just help them with that part of the process.
Yeah, it turns out to be a really great resource for people, you know, and even decluttering. Sometimes it's not always about
Right.
downsizing, right?
Right.
You do
So
that other side of it, correct?
right. We will declutter so they can age gracefully, safer in their home longer. A lot of times that process helps them to see, can I do it? You know, can I not do it? And if they do decide to move, they've already done the decluttering, right? They've already let go of a lot of things. And when they decide to move, we can help them space plan to see what's going to fit in their new space. That helps with the decision-making process. What's great about it is they're in control of those decisions. You know, we're the boots on the ground helping them get it done, but they're making the decisions as opposed to maybe more in a crisis management situation where the decisions are being made for them, which is why all the pre-planning with David is very, very important. So we get involved in packing for them. If they need help with packing, we move them, we unpack them and put everything away, make sure their bed is made. We try and recreate their space so it represents the space they came from, so they're comfortable with it. It's comfortable for them, and we try and relieve just the tension and the stress amongst the families in getting someone from point A to point B.
I
And
know
then
when
we,
we,
oh,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and then, you know, if you need assistance with what are you going to do with all the stuff left behind, we can distribute those things through sales, online auctions, donations, trash removal, and get the entire home cleaned out for you, whether it's for the new owner or a realtor or whatever is the next phase for the home. But you can pick and choose what services you need. Sometimes family can jump in and help in some areas, and they may not need us. And sometimes they do.
And I'd like to jump in for 1 second just to piggyback on what Karen is saying. I will tell you that one of the largest stressors of our clients, and when I mean our clients, it's usually the adult children of, you know, mom or dad who begins to need help, is when the house is cluttered, when there's a hoarding situation to any degree. You know, we can talk about estate planning and documents, and we can take care of all these things, but I will tell you that one of the largest stressors, one of the things that causes the most stress among our clients, Janelle will agree, is what are we going to do with the house and all of the stuff in there? And so one of the greatest things I think we can do for our loved ones, for ourselves, and we can really focus on care while we're in the community still, is to think about what all the stuff that we have and to take care of these things. It may not seem like a big issue right now, but I can assure you that again, it's one of the biggest stressors for family members when they have to come in, step in, and start to make decisions on your behalf.
Well, and I've often heard that, if there are any documents that have been created and are available, the money side is generally pretty straightforward. I guess what astonishes me sometimes is when I hear, the frustrations among family members is over the stuff. So, even more reason to address some of that early on. I used to even say to my parents, that I like this item or my sister likes that item. Don't buy us any more birthday presents or Christmas presents. We don't need anything else. It's an heirloom. In many instances, I would have much rather have had that than the beautiful sweater he bought me, which, you certainly appreciate that too. But, there you go.
And it's always easy to split $100 amongst a number of different people. It's very difficult in a stressful situation, whether an individual has become incapacitated and all these life changes are happening, or even after they passed away. And you know how family dynamics are. It's very difficult without any pre-planning, without any discussion, to split those heirlooms, to decide, how these things, the stuff, is going to be distributed. Sometimes it's no big deal. Families get along. But even great families who have gotten along forever often face difficult times during already stressful situations.
When we were beginning this conversation, Janelle, you were sharing a little bit about, some of the senior choices and how, you work with your clients and families. Can you, just tell us a little bit more about, what you do, what you see?
Sure. I think it's, we try to take people where they're at. And so some people do come in really early and they're ready to plan and get things in place. And then other people are maybe in crisis, a recent hospitalization, a rehabilitation stay. Now we don't know what to do. Can mom or dad go back home? And I think it's important to think about, it's not always just placing in a nursing home. There's a lot of steps in between there and being home. There are in-home care programs, both under Medicaid as well as private pay in-home care options. Sometimes it's using Caring Transitions or, Karen to come out and help them, like she said, declutter, make your home safer, figure out ways to kind of maneuver your setting at home to make sure maybe you move all to the first floor, figure out a way to make it work. So there's a lot of options for in-home before we jump out of we have to move. But even then, there are senior apartment complexes that are typically anywhere between 55 to 65 and over. They're rent controlled. They have minimal services. A lot of times they might have a care manager in the building and maybe some congregate meals, but it just takes sort of that burden, and like you were mentioning, of taking care of your home and doing yard work and things like that. And then it kind of goes up from there. There's independent living communities, like you mentioned, that could be part of a continuing care, similar to McGregor, where, people are living in an apartment complex and they're offered activities and sometimes, again, meals, or maybe they have access to outside resources to help with housekeeping, laundry, stuff like that. And then moving up through assisted living, which obviously is exactly that. They assist you. So, they do have some care services. Maybe they're helping with medication management. I think that's the biggest one. Or if someone just feels like, gosh, I just would feel safer knowing that I can push a button and a nurse will come to see me, that makes a huge difference. And that, they have meals, they have snacks, they have things available for people. So I think there's a lot of steps before, what we think of as a nursing home. And, in some cases there are group homes too. So depending on the situation, maybe someone has a mental health issue, or maybe they've had struggles in the past and, they're not really ready to live in an independent apartment complex, but maybe they need a more home setting. Those are options too. So we just try to see what would be most appropriate to meet their care needs based on not only what their families are telling us, but what they want and what they're looking for and what they would feel comfortable with. But there are a lot of options available.
And I think we're all approached in a different phase of things. When oftentimes, when people come to us at McGregor, they may or may not have an attorney even yet. Their first step may simply be, finding the next step. And that's where, we try to put all those pieces together, whether it be, getting them connected with an appropriate attorney to help them with the challenges they have there, whether it's, figuring out downsizing and what their next step is. And then we might reach out to Karen and her organization. Financial planning and any type of asset protection can either sometimes be through an attorney or, some sort of a financial planner. We work also closely with, some of the local companies and organizations that are trying to help us and our organization identify more affordable housing options out there for older adults, because we do know that people are living so much longer. So the next step may not even be assisted living. There's sometimes that kind of interim step in between where it might be a 55 and older type community where many things are provided, but most of all, what we know is so very important is that social engagement, the social stimulation that keeps us all physically and cognitively active. So, wherever they approach us, whether it comes through the downsizing part of it, whether they come through the attorney side, whether they come through a residential housing side, we're all, knowledgeable in knowing those puzzle pieces and the resources that will help the entire family navigate that. So, and certainly feel free to expel on that. So, the other thing is, and you mentioned it briefly, David, was avoiding probate. The reasons why, first of all, it's so important to have, everything organized so that you don't lose a huge portion of your assets. Will you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if I'm driving home from work today and I'm in some sort of a car accident or I become incapacitated, my wife is my power of attorney for finances, and she's my power of attorney for healthcare. Okay, so with her power of attorney for finances, she can access my 401k, which is only in my name, obviously. But if she needed to do that to pay bills, she could do that. She could change beneficiary designations. She could engage with someone to do the planning that needs to be done financially without any restriction, without needing to get any other authority because it's already been granted to her. At the same time, she's also my healthcare power of attorney, and she's named in my living will. And so she can talk to doctors, she can make decisions, she can do whatever needs to be done on my behalf, making the decisions as if I were there, basically. And again, obviously on my behalf. If those weren't in place, then she may need to go to probate court and apply to get guardianship over me, to obtain access to the 401k, to talk to the doctors, and to make some of those decisions. Not all those decisions, but some of those. The probate process for a guardianship it's long, it's rather expensive, it's very public. And what I mean by public is there's an allegation that an individual is incompetent and they can't take care of themselves and they need a guardian. And the probate court would grant a person guardianship to take care of all those things. And you can get on the probate court website in any county right now and basically look at all the guardianships they have. It's not the biggest deal in the world, and it's very, very necessary in certain occasions, but it's easily avoidable through these powers of attorney. So I gave the example about myself because it's easy to talk about myself, but you can see for mom or dad or a loved one or a spouse, if something happens and they need to move out of the home into assisted living or into nursing home care, or if we need in-home care and they can't make their own decisions, these powers of attorney, without the need to go to probate and get that authority, are so critical. And it's not just getting things done. It's relieving the stress on the loved ones. It's allowing them to focus on the things that are important, the care, the finances, without having to worry about whether they need to, go to probate court and get a guardianship, without the anxiety that comes along with going to court. I can't put sort of a price tag on the level of anxiety that's lifted when these simple things are done before.
Well, and having those important family conversations. An experience that we had here was that there were two children, uh, daughters to this one family, and the one daughter lived in town and the one daughter lived out of town. And of course, the daughter in town was deemed the executor of the estate. The one out of town took that personally. But if you live in Ohio, your executor, if they live in Ohio, they're probably the one that is going to more than likely become the executor because the other one is out of state. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so again, you can name your agents wherever they live, and it's just really it's a function of, is the individual capable? Do we have the technology in place that it won't be difficult to take care of things over state lines, over distance, over geographical distance? But most often, the people that are going to be named as your agents under your powers of attorney, and then the executors to handle your estate. Keep in mind, an executor handles the estate after an individual's died. Same thing as a trustee. Are usually the people that are close. And usually those are the people, again, during life as powers of attorney, can engage with someone like Karen, that can engage with someone like Janelle or myself in order to get things done to make sure that a person is placed properly. To get back to the conversations, the conversational aspect is so important to me, and Janelle can speak to this as well, and I know that the two of you can. When you put a power of attorney in place, it's a legal document. It's sterile. It's boring. Um, there are many conversations about the document itself before it's signed. But when you're in a crisis mode, when mom or dad has a fall and you need to act, the last thing you want to do is to look at this boring, sterile legal document and go, oh my gosh, what am I allowed to do? And what should I do now that I'm the power of attorney? What you really want to draw on, knowing that you've been named as the agent, is you want to draw on the conversation with your spouse or the conversation with your mom or dad that you've had when they say, look, I don't want to, if at all possible, use my assets to make me, able to live in an assisted living rather than, rather than a nursing home or something like that. To draw on the voice of mom or dad or that loved one to say, okay, I have the legal authority. Mom and dad did this, but now I'm going to do what they want. Now I'm going to do what we talked about. Now I have all the authority to do it. And so I'm going to go forward, and now's the time to execute on the planning that they did before. Being able to immediately react unemotionally and without fear is, again, you can't put a price tag on that.
Right. If I can add to the probate issue, a lot of times people think what's in their home, their stuff is valuable, right? It's their money is in their stuff, but it's not really. It's in their property, in their home. And if you're in a probate situation and you're delayed and it's extended, but you need to sell that home to leverage the money for the next phase of medical needs, it's stressful. So having the papers and the documents in place ahead of time really does alleviate that type of situation.
For sure. I think it's also important to note, and I think we've seen a little bit of a shift in this, but people automatically think, okay, I have 5 kids, so they all have to be listed, and we're going to go by oldest to youngest. And otherwise, sometimes people don't, even your spouses, maybe they don't want that responsibility, right? Like, I mean, that's a lot to make healthcare decisions. If I'm in the hospital and someone has to make a decision for me, it has to be someone who's going to be comfortable. Some people, I'm very honest. I'll say, like, oh, I'm way too emotional to try to make a decision based on what you want. I want to do what I want to do for you. And I think that happens a lot in families. So I think it's really important to pick people that want to do it, that are willing to do it, but also say to them, I'm not shorting you. Just because you're the oldest does not mean you have to be
Right.
named first, or just because you're the doctor of the family doesn't mean you have to be my healthcare power of attorney. And some
Or
people
the
have a lot
lawyer
of,
family.
responsibilities right now, so they can't, I think it's just really important. Yes. Well, of course, Dave would be that. I'm just kidding.
Well,
So
and it
I
always
think
comes,
that's just important to remember, that it can be other people, and it should be people you trust and that are going to act on your behalf and according to your wishes. So
and it always comes down to the family dynamics. But I had a laugh one time. We had a mother who had 5 children, and she said, well, I'm not going to have so and so be the power of attorney over my finances because he can't even balance a checkbook. And I'm not going to have so and so be power of attorney over my health care because he's probably going to pull the plug too soon. So it's just kind of interesting to hear, the family dynamics. But it really does warrant, like you said, those conversations, to what makes the most sense. And if you have the conversations, everybody will understand how the decisions were arrived at, and hopefully, maybe we can avoid some hurt feelings, or people feeling slighted during that process of communication. So we have one question, as we're kind of talking about finances and probate. One question did come up, and the question was, why does all of the residents' money have to be given to the center that they're at? And, speaking from, our standpoint, we don't ask for an endowment to move into any part of McGregor. There might be a community move-in fee, could be anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500, but we're not asking for any type of endowment or all the residents' money. But David and Janelle, if you both could speak to scenarios where that can happen or does happen and the reason behind it.
Well, I'll speak to this. This is a common sort of, I don't want to, it's a misconception that, if I enter a facility of any sort, that I have to give everything that I own to the facility, or that the nursing home will take my house, right? Or or the facility, or whatever it is, or that you have to give everything to the state. That's a really common misconception. I have to give everything to Ohio before I qualify for Medicaid. It's just not the way that it works. There is eligibility for public benefits, and then there's eligibility to get into a facility. We're talking about either Medicaid or private pay. So let's talk about private pay for a second. If you can afford on a monthly basis your assisted living fee of $4,000 a month, if that's what it is, then you pay for it. That doesn't, and you pay for it as you need it on a monthly basis. That doesn't mean you have to sign everything over. You do have to be aware that if your income covers 2,000 of that a month, how much of your assets will you need to tap into on a monthly basis in order to pay for that, which is understandable. Many people accept that as a reality. And then what happens when the money runs out? That's often when you turn to when you turn to Medicaid eligibility, another level of care and things like that. And that's where I come in, again, for that pre-planning, to know what's going to happen when your available assets run out, to stop private paying, or how we can protect the assets that you do have, from estate recovery or things like that. But in those circumstances, an individual going to qualify for Medicaid by transferring their house to the state of Ohio, or really even giving any money to the state of Ohio. An individual qualify for Medicaid, again, whether that's in the community, an assisted living waiver, or nursing home, when they've met the eligibility requirements for Medicaid, which is different for a married couple than it is for a single individual. The last thing I'll say on this, it's very, very deep. This is like an inch wide and a mile deep, and I could talk for probably 3 hours on everything I'm talking about right now. But keep in mind that financing long-term care for a married couple presents more opportunities than most people realize. The community spouse, that is the spouse that will remain in the home in the community, has the ability to keep the home, to keep the car, to keep all of their income. And then with assets left over, we can convert that, we can pay off debt. We can do so many things so that in a married couple situation, when one spouse needs long-term care at any level of care, we can ensure that that's going to be financed while preserving the bulk of the assets for the spouse to live on in the community as happy and as healthy as possible.
There's also the issue of spend down, which is very confusing for individuals too.
It is confusing, and spend down, again, it's, you don't have to, let me give the example of a married couple again. A lot of people think that you have to spend down all of the assets that you have left over after what the community spouse is allowed to keep in order to qualify. And again, the Medicaid law itself, the Medicaid Act, which is a federal program passed down to all the states, is designed to protect the spouse that doesn't need the care. And so the spouse is not going to need to be impoverished in order for the spouse that needs care to have their bills paid. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have to, spend anything, but the spend down is not as simple as people think. And there are a lot of opportunities, again, to make sure that the spouse that's not needing the care, that those assets can be preserved for them.
And just to add to that, I'm not sure if the question was talking about like a continuing care community. There are places where maybe a couple says, okay, we're done living in this house. We want to move together to a community that's going to provide for our care needs throughout every cycle of life. So maybe they have independent living associated with their assisted living, associated with their skilled or nursing home. So some people do go in and they discuss their full gamut of their finances, and then they say, okay, we're going to sign this contract, and that's a discussion that they have with these facilities. And then they say, we're going to take care of you forever, like until you pass away. And I think, they make sure that they're constantly meeting a certain level of care to be appropriate for where they're living in their community. And so that's where sometimes people think about that. I think on the flip side of that, some people get very confused about, what a nursing home covers, and that their income will sometimes go to a facility as the rep payee if they're getting just Social Security or something to that effect. It's part of their patient liability, because the reality is nursing home care is incredibly expensive, and it should cover, your meals and pretty much everything you need, really. So most people typically pay a patient liability that is their income minus $50 a month, and that money goes into like a resident account, and that resident account can be used for different things, haircuts or any additional sort of needs that they might have. I would say the majority of clients that we have that end up in facilities, like nursing facilities, long-term care, typically don't really need too much outside of the nursing home. Occasionally, we do have some younger individuals that maybe want to have Netflix in their room, so maybe they use that money for something like that. But there are options. It's not just an all or nothing. I think a lot of people, again, like Dave had mentioned, think it's this drastic, that's it. But there are discussions to be had. There's ways to work things out for your needs. I think when you're looking at care needs, I think, I always try to focus on the least restrictive sort of option first. So if we're at home, how can we keep people safe? How can we reorganize? Maybe that's not possible. So then we look at the next sort of level of care. And I think we're always looking for safety, right? So we want to make sure that someone, if there's a fire, this is what I always throw out to people. If there's a fire, does your loved one, whether it be your spouse, your mom, your dad, will they know to call 911? Will they know to call anybody? Will they know how to get out of your house? That's really important. Things like, if someone is confused, maybe they have an early dementia diagnosis, they're starting to kind of get confused if they're going for their evening walk, or maybe you notice they're getting confused and lost while they're driving. Those are things to start talking about to make sure things are in place at home to keep them safe. And, a lot of times, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is, talking to their doctors, talking to your medical care. I've had clients in the past who are newly diagnosed with dementia, and they say to their doctors, I want you to tell me when you think I can't do this by myself anymore. Or they say to their families, I need you to tell me, be honest, and tell me when you're starting to get concerned. I think that's the most honest and open way to approach it. I know it's not easy for everybody. And, and some people, we all go through that stage of, I want to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. That's kind of everyone's goal. But I think you constantly need to kind of reassess and say, are your physical needs being met? Is your emotional? I think Karen had mentioned moving to different facilities or different, apartment complexes or senior living communities adds some socialization. It adds some activities. It adds something extra that maybe you would not have access to if you were just in your home. So it's important to look at sort of every aspect of someone's life and their care. And if they're able to do it for themselves, great. But sometimes family members do need to say, gosh, I just feel like we're getting a little unsafe here, maybe with the stove or something to that effect. And so it's important to look at all those aspects when looking at care.
So we have another question from a participant, so I want to make sure we get to all these. So this person says that they set up the parents' remaining properties, rental in Maine, under a family trust that has this person listed as the co-trustee. The question is, if something happens to dad, as now the remaining survivor, will I be able to act on behalf of the trust to sell properties? And before we finish, one more thing he adds, dad now has dementia, so I'm understanding that he's likely unable to assign rights legally.
Yeah, so this is it's a good question. It's really common actually, but it's highly dependent on what the trust says. Many trusts have co-trustees allow the trustees to act independently of each other. And so the trust might state that you as a co-trustee have the ability, outside or notwithstanding any capacity issues with your father, to act and to sell, whether that's before or after he passes. Other trusts that I draft, or that other trusts could state that the co-trustees must act in unison. When we're talking about incapacity of a trustee, the trust document itself should describe circumstances where what you have to do to prove that a trustee is incapacitated, and then it goes to the next successor trustee named. So it's highly dependent on how the trust is drafted, but generally speaking, a trustee has the ability to manage, it has the authority to manage and to deal with any property that's in the trust. That's the whole point of putting items in a trust. And what it also does is it avoids probate. You already have the authority, you already have the ownership, you already have the rights listed in the trust to do what you need to do. And so it's really common. It's really common planning, but I wish I could be more specific in answering your question, but generally speaking, those are the things that I would be looking at.
And during these times of COVID, I mean, we're all learning to do things differently. We're doing tours virtually. We're having these family conversations, as a family unit through Microsoft Teams or a Zoom meeting or FaceTime or something of that nature. Karen, just to bring you back into the loop here, when that downsizing and moving from point A to point B is happening, I know that your organization has really looked to some of the COVID protocols to make sure that everyone is safe, both the resident, their family, and the teams that are moving. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. So, we adapt daily because community guidelines change daily. But we do really take very close caution. We follow all the proper protocols, the CDC protocols. We are a franchise of 200 offices, so we are regulated by our corporate office in Cincinnati, who also pushes out specific guidelines. So typically, if we do meet with you, we're either separate from you in the room, or we're doing a virtual visit to put an estimate together. We'll greet with a smile, not a handshake. No offense, of course. We take temperatures. Our team takes temperatures before they start the day. And, in the past, people, our clients have had like family members there during that packing day. So we avoid that now. We say, if your family members want to come ahead of time and help you with some things, please do that, but not while we're there. Our team works in different rooms now. We have a team member in different rooms as opposed to a few team members working together. And one thing that's uncomfortable sometimes for our client is we ask them to wear a mask in their home, which typically they think, my home is my safe area. I don't need to wear a mask. But if we are in your home, we are wearing masks, and we ask that you wear a mask too. So we try and educate and make everybody as comfortable as possible. And I think a big thing is communication, just letting them know ahead of time what to expect, what our process is going to be like. You know, we're communicating with the community, making sure that we have the correct move-in date. We're communicating with the care coordinators, and making sure that everybody's taken care of properly. And as David mentioned about the memory care patients, you know, we process their space a little differently. Memory care patients do tend to hide cash in their home. And this is very important. If you do get a senior move manager to help you with a home, please make sure they are all background checked, insured, and bonded, and they have safety protocols in the home. They're overseen by a manager, because we come across a lot of cash. Cash gets put into books. So instead of just donating a stack of books, we will flip through each book. Record albums, freezers, underneath dresser drawers. You'd be really surprised what memory care patients can do. So it's always really good to know our client very, very well when we're working in their home.
Yeah, that's certainly really important. You know, we also, much like you, Karen, you know, we have to limit sometimes even the visits that are permitted to 2 family members, you know, limited to 30-minute visits. You can't just come and stay all day like you
Right.
used to be able to. Even when we were doing outdoor visits, there were limitations of you're coming just as your person. Don't bring clothing, don't bring food, you know, all those other items, you know, run risks of putting others, you know, in jeopardy. And it's really a hard, you know, transition to make when you're used to no hugs, no hugging, no
Right.
kissing. I mean, it was very difficult in the beginning when we started outdoor visits in July, and then, you know, things closed up again. And you know, we have been allowed to do compassionate visits, especially for residents who are failing to thrive. That's a good qualifier for that, and not just hospice or palliative care reasons. But again, the limitations are 2 visitors and 30-minute visits, and you know, monitoring protocols when you arrive for temperature and so forth. And so you know, we definitely have learned to just adapt to, you know, kind of a different way of living. And all in our senior communities are even focusing more on, you know, some other things that we didn't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention to. I think there's more focus on prioritizing, you know, the health and wellness, teaching and learning, you know, new and healthy habits, promoting creative aging, you know, programs that are more, you know, cardio related, so that we're getting the heart and lungs going, but also we're getting the oxygen up to the brain, which we know now is, you know, so vitally important. You know, some of the lifelong learning programs that we've been able to offer with the Cleveland Museum of Art, and other individuals who offer, you know, kind of long distance learning programs. You know, just because COVID surrounds us doesn't mean we stop living. And so, you know, we've all increased the uses of technology and tried to come up with unique and fascinating ways to, you know, even do word jumbles, or, you know, get back into the Wii games, things of that nature. You know, we might use more Nerf things inside than we ever did before, just to, you know, kind of keep everybody moving. So, so anyway, so we've all adapted. And you know, I know, David, you referenced at one point in time that, you know, when COVID, you know, kind of struck us straight in the face, and it was the reality of it all, you know, you had people that maybe had approached you years ago thinking, well, maybe it's time to do this. Now they're circling back because they're realizing there is no time like the present, right?
That's right. You know, it's a great thing that I've seen so many people recently who I may have talked to years ago, even, and we're starting to see people come into the spring, and the sun's out longer, and people are starting to feel like there's glimmers of hope with the vaccine rollout. And, even clients that are now allowed to visit their loved ones in facilities and things like that, that everybody's taking a look and go, wow, anything can happen. And I mean, that's a scary statement, but it's also, it's also a healthy statement. Anything can happen. Who would have thought that we would have gone through as a community what we've gone through over the last 12 months? And so it's easy to hear someone like me say, boy, now's the time to plan. And estate planning is really important, and it's not that hard and everything. But it's hit home for a lot of people recently. And the message I have is, any anxiety that you have over starting the process, the first step in getting rid of 95% of that anxiety is to just make the phone call to whomever you want to help you, to just start talking about it, get in the conversation. And all of a sudden, once you're in it, you'll realize that your anxiety is just the same sort of fear that we've all been dealing with, the fear of the unknown. Once you have the answers, anything can be dealt with.
So we're
It is
coming
a
up near
gift.
the, oh, okay, go ahead.
It's a gift. It's a gift to the family to have some things pre-planned. And I think Janelle would know, when you're working with families and they're already under enough stress as it is, if they see that you've already put some guidelines in place for them, it really makes the process much easier. That's all. Thank you.
And I think, from our standpoint too, we've recognized that people are not always wanting to be in residential care facilities or nursing homes. That's why it's so important to look for alternative at home, care options. And, one of the options certainly that we offer, which is a national program, is PACE. It's the Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. It is important, we recognize, to keep people and individuals connected to their community, their own homes, their neighborhoods, while still providing, the primary care physicians, the social work resources, the transportation, therapy, access to, adult day health centers, which actually is a much easier way to access care through that one of the health centers than going to the ER and facing the costs that ERs charge. So it's a much more affordable way of living. And yet, if you compare it to Passport, it still offers the addition of the adult health centers. It still offers the addition of transportation. So, certainly, we continue to look for those affordable options. But I do want to get to a question that somebody has. They said, I'm having trouble finding more burial assistance for my mom. One of her policies was canceled a while back, and that is where I will run short. Any advice?
I mean, it is very hard to find, to be honest. There are certain, either if someone belongs to a church or religious institution, sometimes they do have funding available for maybe, parishioners that are, more indigent or maybe didn't have a plan in place. There is some indigent burial assistance that you can contact. And I'm trying to think of who it's through, but you can Google it and look it up. And there is some resources in different cities. So it just kind of depends, but it is a very tough thing to find. Sometimes it's working with funeral homes. They can be very understanding with what you're going through and that you want to do the right thing by your loved one who maybe didn't have a plan in place. And they can often work with you either on estates, and what you might be receiving as an inheritance and making payments. And so they can be somewhat flexible and work with you. But that's why we stress so much, knowing what you have, knowing what's available. And that's a lot of the conversation that Dave has with individuals, is saying, what do you have? And then maybe they would have caught, oh, mom's, policy expired and we can do something about it now. So it is very tricky, but there is some assistance. It just takes a little research.
If I can add to that, there's actually a local high school that offers up their students as pallbearers. It's a gift to the surrounding community. So if you need more information on that, feel free to reach out to Leanne and I can connect you there. it's a lovely service.
Wow.
So we're coming up on the very end. There was a lot of information here, more to come, more to cover. I'm sure we'll do one of these again in the near future. So basically, you know, when it's time, and I know Karen has her Ohio rule of thumb, which, you know, I find kind of interesting if we want to kind of share that with everybody. But yeah, it's kind of an acronym, but, you know, when it is
Sure.
time to move on and to leave, any one of us, you know, may play a role in the resources that you need. So,
Yes.
what do you say with that, Karen? How does it
Let's
go?
bring some humor into this, right? Because there is a lot to go through, you know? We've
Yeah,
got
yeah.
clients who have multiple vacuums in the basement, and we asked the gentleman, so why do you have all these vacuums? Well, I got a great deal on them, so I bought 3. So when you're going through your things, I say follow the Ohio rule. Only handle it once. Set up a sorting system, have donate, return to owner, trash, sell, and try and only handle it once so it doesn't slow you down, and start in a non-emotional space. That makes it easier. If you come across emotional things, set those sides like family pictures and important documents for a time when you can pay more attention to it.
Yeah. So we'll share all of the slides for the different organizations here in the last portion of our presentation. This presentation will appear on McGregor's YouTube channel, so look for that probably next week. And you know, if you have any additional needs, questions, feel free to reach out to any one of us. We'll be more than happy to share our insights. Thank you to David, Janelle, and Karen. This was wonderful. I think we probably could have gone through the afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you to those of you who have shared your well wishes on enjoying the program. And we hope that we'll see all of you next time. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and get out there, enjoy the sunshine.
Yes.
Thank
thank
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.